welcome. I'm Michaela Parker, founder and executive director for the Academic Data Science Alliance, and I'm here to welcome you today to the reboot of our career panel. But before we get started, I wanted to introduce those of you who are not familiar with the Academic Data Science Alliance to a little bit about our community. We are a community of data science researchers and educators who take responsibility for a just, equitable future where data science approaches are thoughtfully applied in all domains for the benefit of all. And on the bottom of this slide are some of our supporters and funders. You'll also find here a QR code, and this will be on subsequent slides as well, that will take you directly to our website where you can learn more. And so with that, again, I'm welcoming you to this reboot of our career panel series where we demystify the data work behind a number of careers and jobs that you find out there in the world. I'm supported in this work by Stella Min, our community coordinator, recently hired for our career development network. If you're not familiar with that network, again, I encourage you to check out our website. And now I want to do a brief introduction of our panelists. Sandeep Bansal is a data scientist supporting product growth science at Warner Brothers Discovery for CNN. Sandhya, unfortunately, was unable to join us today. She is sick and lost her voice, which does not obviously work very well for a panel. We're sorry not to have her here. I did want to note that she is a data reporter for the LA Times desk, where she covers demographics and diversity of California and the nation. And she does encourage all of you to send her tips at sandhya@latimes.com. Casey Miller previously worked in journalism at the LA Times as well, and Vox Media. She is currently an engineer at Locana, a geospatial consulting agency. And finally, Christine Zhang is an editing resident on the New York Times graphics desk. She previously worked in data and graphics journalism at the Financial Times, the Baltimore Sun, and the LA Times. So with that, I'd really like to turn it over to our panelists now and have each of them give us a brief, but a little bit more extensive than I just did, description of their career paths and maybe briefly about their roles. I should stop sharing so you can all see them. There we go. Let's go ahead and start alphabetically by last name again. So Sandeep, can you give us a brief overview of how you got to where you are now and what kind of work do you do?
Sure. Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Sandeep, and I graduated with a degree in biology. I wanted to pursue a career in healthcare. But I decided to pivot into tech. My roommate was a data scientist, and that's how I learned about the career. And I ultimately decided to pursue a master's in data science, and now I'm here.
Great, thank you. Casey? Oh, you're muted, Casey.
Yep. So I originally kind of just fell into journalism. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to study in college, and the journalism school had a bunch of interesting classes. And so I took a few classes in there, and my friend was like, hey, back, I don't know what, this was 2011. I was like, they have this cool program called multimedia. You should check it out. I think you'll like it. And basically, as I'm sure you all are aware of these programs now, it's like, you kind of are in a J school, but you're learning how to write code and make apps or visualizations or do data analysis. And so I kind of was like, oh, this is great. I love this. So I kind of fell down that path and started, I really loved visualizing data, and I also loved building applications. And so I kind of hopped around. I interned right after college at the LA Times doing heavily apps work. Then I worked at Vox and did a mix of front end and back end work. Briefly, from there, I jumped to Mapbox for like a year, where I did map work, but mostly front end. And then LA Times, where I did a mix of both. And now doing consulting, where I'm also doing a mix of both. So I'll talk more about why I ended up exactly where I am later, but I'm using a lot of the same skills that I've used throughout journalism. And it seemed like a pretty natural progression for now.
Great, thank you. And how about you, Christine?
Yeah, so I kind of also, ended up in journalism, not in a planned kind of way. I majored in economics in undergrad and I minored in English, but I never worked on my school newspaper. I read the newspaper. That was my extent of involvement in the journalism industry. So after I graduated, I worked at a bank for a few years, and then I went to grad school, still not pursuing journalism. I got a master's in quantitative methods in the social sciences to kind of up my data analysis skills, which was something I was very interested in, doing more analysis. After that, I worked in DC at a think tank called the Brookings Institution, doing economic research, because that was kind of where I thought my career was going at that point in time. But I learned about data and graphics journalism while I was there, and I started seeing a lot of really interesting interactive stories, graphics stories in newspapers and online, and I really thought that was such an exciting thing and something I really wanted to be a part of, and so that was kind of my first encounter with data and graphics journalism, and that's what led me on the path to where I am now and working in this particular subset of journalism.
Yeah, well, that's so there. I detect a theme here from all of you where you didn't really plan on going into data journalism. Maybe you weren't even aware that such a thing existed. Do you now, a little bit maybe further into your careers, feel that there's still a lack of awareness of data journalism as a field? And maybe a comment or two about whether you're seeing more advertising for these kinds of positions, or is it still generally the people that are hired into these roles, they just kind of come into it from knowing somebody who knows somebody? And I'm going to open that up unless they want to raise their hand.
Yeah, I mean, I could start. I think that it has, I wouldn't say it's grown a ton over the past like 5 years, but I think that as an industry, it has grown immensely over the past few decades. And I think that, I think that you can view that in a couple of different ways, and that like the data world and journalism have kind of, I mean, I talk about it in the sense of programming. So like in terms of like applications, whether you're doing front end code or back end code, but there's a lot more to it than that. That's just like my area is like, I don't really do much heavy data analysis. I never have. I don't really want to be honest. So I'm glad that other people do. And there's like more like statistical kinds of it. And then there's also people who are like heavily focused on like specifically interactives. And so I think there's more niche areas, definitely. And so like, I think that like data analysis is like a broad term, is kind of like more expansive than maybe what we thought of it as one time, as like, okay, I crunched some numbers for stories. And there's, I think that does still happen. It is still part of it. But I think that, a lot of these people who doing jobs that we do also report their own stories. And that's, I think, another shift in the way that data has been viewed within journalism over the past 10 or so years, is really more or less of a service desk, more of a do-it-yourself kind of thing.
Yeah. Sandeep or Christine, did you want to pile on that at all?
I would just say that I do think in terms of hiring and looking for skills and such to get these jobs, I do think that there is more consideration now of people who have like zero experience or background in journalism, but have the skills technically and that could mean a range of different things, as Casey mentioned nowadays, but have the skills technically to do, the niche part of the data or graphics or interactive journalism. My experience was, at least for my own, for me, when I was trying to get jobs in journalism, people would ask me during the interview, like, oh, did you work on your school newspaper? That's why I mentioned it during my introduction. And I would say no. And they would be like, oh, like, why do you want to work for the news then, if you've had no previous encounters with it? Which maybe is a fair question, right? But I think, a lot of the focus on hiring for these very specific jobs that require technical skills is having the skills and showing that you're able to do that and also learn and progress while you're in the job.
Yeah, no, I very much appreciate that. And in some ways that makes it a little bit easier. Maybe it makes it more open for people to consider this kind of job because it is not so forced into, somebody who did write for their school newspaper. Sandeep, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I feel like maybe, data journalism, it could be more focused. I think it's a pretty broad topic, and there are a lot of different roles in the data space. So I think in terms of applications, I think it's very important for the applicant to know exactly what they're interested in, in order for them to apply for the right role and to be able to practice the specific skills that they have, worked on over a period of time in order to prepare them for success. But ultimately, I agree with everything else that was said. So
yeah, well, let's talk about that first job, like getting into that first role that might lead you towards that. I think, Casey, you might have mentioned internships. Is that fairly common? And where would somebody find an internship opportunity?
I could start. Yes, I think it's really common. I think that, like, especially, I think it's hard. So I've had a lot of things to think about when we're saying this. So, like, especially for people coming out of school, whatever like level it is, period. I've seen a lot of different folks do, not usually super long, but like short couple month internships just to kind of meet people and get in the door at a place and kind of feel out what it's going to be like. I think this can sometimes be hard, depending on, unlike what Christine was saying about having like this very similar skills. Sometimes there are people coming from different industries who like want to transfer in, who have like a full-time career, who want to transfer into journalism, who haven't done a lot of this type of work or have these skills. And it's also a really good area for like folks who want to transfer over, but it can be hard sometimes because you're going from having a full-time job with benefits to interning, which I don't think anybody would really want to do, except unless you're like really passionate about making that career change. And I do think if you are new to the industry, internships could be great, a great way to kind of get started. I would love to hear what the other folks have to say. My last little bit about that is that most major news places have internships. So I would say the number one way to find them is just to go to the website and look for them. They're going to have the most accurate information. They'll probably tweet about it too, but the website is probably the best source.
Yeah. And I hear you about taking an unpaid job. Maybe there's internships they could do during the summer while a student, if that helps at all. Sandeep?
Yes, I was just going to say, it's very important to be, flexible with the path and be stubborn with the goal. It's okay to say you want to become a data scientist, data analyst or professional in data, but the path you need to be flexible with the path. It's okay to take an internship or volunteer. I had to volunteer. And I think the experience is all about what you make it. And, if as a volunteer, I can say I learned a lot. I've volunteered remotely with UCLA in their health sector in my first semester in data science. And I learned a lot of information, but I had to be open to that. I had to be open to the fact that this was an unpaid position. I had to be open to the fact that this was not technical work experience and that I probably won't be doing the larger projects. And that's something that you just have to be okay with and to understand that everything is temporary. You may be a volunteer for a specific period of time, but it's not something that will last forever, and you'll eventually reach the ultimate goal.
Christine, do you have anything to pile on?
I mean, only to say, yeah, it is hard. You like if you have, let's say you have a full-time career somewhere and you want to start into a field, internships are great. Part-time work is great for gaining that kind of experience. The way I got my first job in journalism at the LA Times, in fact, was through a fellowship program, which was a 1-year program funded by an outside organization called Open News, which I believe also has a jobs board now and can be a really great way to learn about different kinds of opportunities in journalism. I can post some links or send them to you after this meeting.
Yeah, please do. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm gonna not interrupt for a second to say I completely forgot to say to the audience as well, post in the chat links that might be relevant. Panelists, please feel free to do that as well. I think that's a super helpful way to share resources.
Yeah. So what was that? Oh yeah, so that is how I got my first job in journalism. But I did after that 1 year was over, though, not in fact get a job in journalism. After that, I had to look for jobs in a lot of different places because I didn't have a job. So I found a job working in data analysis, and I kind of felt I found time, outside of my job to freelance work for certain publications or do my own side projects. And that was my entryway into journalism while I was working on that job. And thankfully, that created more, I don't want to say experience. Well, yeah, maybe. That created more experience for me so that when I saw a full-time job offer at another news organization, I could point to more things that I had done that were immediately relevant to journalistic work.
Yeah, thank you. And I know this is a bit skipping to the end, but since we're on the topic of how to find the job, the roles that you're in currently, so not the first one you entered into, but the roles you're in now, were those, especially with the news organization, are those just advertised somewhere? I mean, I assume the website of the news organizations themselves, but if somebody's looking, there's a lot of publications out there. Is there a resource for finding these positions?
I found mine on LinkedIn. That was the
go.
primary source that I use. I was really specific in the search of what I was looking for in terms of my first data science role. So, and I was lucky to find one here at CNN. So I would say LinkedIn is what I used.
Christine or Casey, how did you get in current? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, very specifically, I first saw my job position on a Slack called News Nerdery. I'll post it in the chat. It's a Slack channel for people who work as quote unquote news nerds, which is a very umbrella term to encompass varying kinds of data technology, graphics, interactive journalism.
That's very cool.
I will say mine. It's, I guess, a little bit less applicable because it's not currently a journalism job. But when I was leaving my last job, I kind of had a better idea of like what I was looking for in my next job, and I was like, okay, I like being able to use these skills. And my last journalism job, I was doing a lot of web mapping, and I was like, I would love to continue doing maps with apps with maps. And I was like, okay, where can I find that? And did some digging as journalists are wont to do. Twitter's a great place to just kind of look around on. And so I was like, okay, well, what are I knew of a couple of like mapping conferences, and I was like, what are the main conferences and who are the sponsors for these conferences? It's a very circuitous route that I took to find this place, but I like found this conference, it's a mapping conference, and I looked at the sponsor for the conference, and I was like, oh, that company looks cool. And then I went to that company website, and I was like, do they have any jobs that would fit me? And they did, and I applied for it, and I got it. And so like it was, it worked out. But definitely that's the first time I've taken such an interesting route to finding a job. Usually it's more obvious than that.
Yeah, but honestly, I feel like that's really great advice for almost any job in a STEM field, right? Or maybe even outside STEM. Look at the conferences, see who's sponsoring, really how you can follow the trail.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Since since you mentioned your transition, and I was going to ask you about it anyway, do you want to give us a few insights into why you left data journalism?
Yeah. It was not an easy decision, and there's never to say that I won't ever do it again. But I, as a lot of people did during the peak of the pandemic, got kind of burned out. I was in charge of our disaster applications, which I really did love. We had an earthquake application, this is the LA Times, and a fire map application. And it's also, as every year is now, a huge fire season. And so I was kind of like, I had set up the map, I'd set up all these pipelines for things, but it was still a very new product. And so like, I was very passionate about getting like evacuation zones on there. But I was also the only one who knew how to find the evacuation zones and get them on the map, and also do COVID data coverage shifts, and also do COVID data reporting. And during 2020, I also realized that like, I had some hobbies, and I was like, I would really love to like actually spend more time doing some of these things. And particularly I do martial arts, and I'm very into doing martial arts. And that is a hobby where you have to show up at the class at a certain time. And if you don't get there at that time, you don't do that class. And so it was really hard, like and that wasn't really hard to anything. It was just like, that was something like, as I'm thinking about, well, what do I really want out of my life these next few years anyway? And I was like, I think I really love some more stability where I know that I'm going to be able to focus on some of these things outside of work as well that I really want to focus on, and not have to be tied to the computer or have it with me all the time. That's not to say that every journalism job is like that, but it is more common in journalism than it is in a lot of other industries, especially if you're cognizant of, if you want to call it work-life balance, work-life mindfulness, what have you, when you're interviewing for a job. Like, it's never a fail-safe, but like, it does help to be like, how seriously do you take this? And that's applicable for journalism too. I mean, different rules, different places, but like, yeah, I mean, some people don't mind working different hours. I am one that I kind of like, I'm like at this point where I am right now, physically in my life where I'm living, but also what I want to be doing. It just makes more sense for me to do something that has pretty standard hours and has some flexibility, but like, there's no huge surprises coming my way.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I think we'll talk a little bit about a typical day in a moment, but I think I want to first loop back to the skills. So the skills that are involved in data journalism. I'm hearing graphics, visualizations. These are things that at least a few of you have already mentioned as core to the work you do. Maybe you could give me a little bit of an overview, give our audience an overview of what kinds of data skills do you use, and maybe also not just what sort of data work, data-driven skills, but are there skills that you've kind of picked up that are outside what you have been doing that are helping you, be it writing or other things like that? So Sandeep, let's start with you.
Yes, in terms of specific skills, I think it really is based on the job title that you're looking for. A data analyst will have his specific skill set versus a data scientist versus a machine learning engineer versus a business analyst. All of these roles work with data in a different capacity. So for me personally, I tried to build a great foundation with Python, statistics. I selected a cloud technology, and I kind of tried to understand how that was used with AWS. And I really started to just snowball these skills and try to get better at them as I was growing. And luckily for me, I have a lot of awesome mentors at work who have kind of helped me along the way and have given me great advice. And so, yeah, I would say Python, statistics, SQL is a big one. And if you can get your hands on machine learning at a general level, that'd be awesome.
Great. Christine, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, it really varies depending on like the type of the particular type of job you have in journalism, even in data journalism or news nerdery land or whatnot. I used to get really intimidated when I saw job postings. I think they're mostly better about it now at news organizations, but they would say like data reporter or graphics reporter, and then the requirements list would be this like 20 bullet point list of things that are like, you need to know R, you need to know Python, you need to know HTML, you need to know CSS, you need to know all of these things. And like, and then, oh yeah, also you have to like write, you have to report, you have to create X number of graphics every week, whatever. And I would get so intimidated reading those. And the reality is no one person is an expert in all of those bullet points. They're kind of unicorn-esque people. Typically what a job posting means when they list out all those things is these are the skills that collectively across our department we use sometimes. So I think job postings have gotten better in the sense that sometimes they'll say like, even if you do not have all these skills, don't worry, please still apply. Or they'll say like, we really value expertise in this one specific thing, and then something else, like the others are kind of nice to have. Generally, I think Sandeep is right in like the advice to try to develop expertise in a specific thing. I'm not I'm not a Python expert by any means. When I do data analysis, I do it in R, and I've learned a lot about how to manipulate data frames and do a lot of like data cleaning work as well as statistical analysis using R, and even do some visualizations using the packages in R. And then in terms of like making the graphic, I'll touch it up in using Adobe Illustrator or generally the Adobe suite of tools. I don't know if this is too specific or not, but just thinking about that. I think one skill that is maybe not so much a technical skill, but more of a broad picture thing is, I find working in this field, it's really important to be able to identify, the particular story ideas or angles you want to take with data. By which I mean, when I worked in academia or in academia adjacent things, it was a lot about exploring, and we have a lot of time to explore, what we want to do in this paper or in this particular research, and we may go in several different directions and go into like a very nuanced study of a given topic. In journalism, certainly deep dives and nuance are important, but you do want to focus like on a few top things for one particular story when you're trying to pitch it as an idea or even try to work on it and get it published. Like, think about the news stories that you read, even not so much breaking news, but think about like even like longer form analyses or visualization or interactive stories. They're not trying to do everything all at once. They usually do have a focus. So I think that's an important skill to be able to identify or think about how to identify that.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. Casey, and then I want to come back around too to and so I can cue it up for you, where you got some of these skills, whether this was more formal coursework on your own, on the job training, informal hack weeks, whatever. But Casey, do you want to jump in first about the skills that you use as a data journalist?
Yeah, I mean, I think that everything that both Sandeep and Christine said is correct. I think that like it really depends on what you're wanting to do. I mean, even within data journalism, I mean, we even have the newsroom roles, and then like also the more product side roles, and also that the kind of I'm guessing, but kind of like Sandeep's role, like the more like data analysis behind the scenes kind of role. Please correct me when you're talking if I'm wrong. But like there's a lot there, and so it's like kind of what do you like, and then picking the skills that you want to learn based on what gets you closer to that. And it's not necessarily going to be nothing you pick is going to be totally wrong. Everything has a place somehow. I mean, me personally, I largely use, like, I don't do the same stuff that I was doing 10 years ago, but like, I liked that stuff, and so I've continued learning that type of thing. So like I learned how to do basic front end and basic back end work, and I've taken that into doing full stack app development, and I did it in journalism as well. And it's just kind of like iteratively learning, mostly in internships and at work, but sometimes on my own, depending on what it was. I have a couple of like, and sometimes together. Sometimes they've like kind of like things I've learned at work have like kind of made me think about like, oh, well, what if I wanted to do this thing and I don't have time to do that at work? And I'm like, but I really want to figure out how to do it. And so I take some of the basic building blocks that I learned from a project that I worked on and like apply it in like my own project, which I've done a couple of times in the past 2 years to like kind of get some prototypes for stuff running, especially now that I'm not in journalism. And I'm like, I really want to do open source work in some areas as well. So it lends well. But yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any right or wrong. I'm curious to hear how you all have experienced that.
Yeah, at CNN, I feel like I've had an opportunity to work with a lot of different teams. So I consider myself very lucky. I've worked with an engineering team, machine learning, data analytics, data science. So, I had a certain skill set, and I'm fortunate enough to be able to ask someone, hey, are you familiar with Tableau? How do I, use this data to make a visualization, or bash scripting, or something in AWS? Luckily, all of our teams we use communication a lot in order to kind of understand who's good at what and how we can use each other's strengths and weaknesses to build the best product. So that's that. Yep.
Any comments on where you picked up the skills for, I mean, so, some of the basic data science skills you mentioned, R, SQL, Python, were these the courses you took in through formal education in your schools, or did you learn these outside? Christina, I saw you unmute. Do you want to chime in?
Yeah, well, I think everyone learns in different ways. Some people really enjoy the structure of formal courses, and others not so much. I would say though, generally, I think this is probably true for everyone. Generally, you learn best when you're doing something that you actually are passionate about and you really want to do it because you care about it, right? So if data analysis using R or SQL is what you want to learn, I would suggest trying to accomplish a task that you really want to accomplish by using those things. Yeah, I think that's the best way. One time when I had moved to New York, I didn't know if I had any friends in the city, so I was thinking, what's one way I could find people who like I sort of know who are in New York. And I learned how to use, it was Python actually for this task, a Python script to find people who followed me on Twitter who also live in New York City. And so not that like all of them became my friends, obviously, because Twitter is not real life, as they say, right? But sometimes there are people who you have encountered or know, and so that was a fun thing I wanted to accomplish, and I knew that there was a way to accomplish it in Python. I just didn't know how, and so I bridge the gap between what I wanted to do and the skill I wanted to learn by learning it to do that. So I would say, even if it's small things, to find ways to accomplish passion projects. Python has I think there's a blog called Automate the Boring Stuff using
Yes.
Python. And that is, that's something I would highly recommend looking through, because it teaches you how to do things that are just like everyday tasks, but it can be more efficiently done using Python, and then you pick up Python along the way. Yeah.
I love that. Can somebody drop that link in the chat for the group? That is fantastic. I actually have a similar anecdote from way back when I was working in an oceanography lab. We hired a bioinformatics person because they taught themselves, I believe back then, Perl to track their gaming, I think. I don't remember exactly, but again, it was a passion project, nothing to do with bioinformatics. You teach yourself, right? Yeah, that's fantastic. Sandeep or Casey, do you want to comment about informal versus formal training or on-the-job training before we move on?
Yes, I feel like in school, I got a broad introduction to many different tools. However, I feel like to master or get closer to being an expert at some of these skills, you have to put in a lot of work outside, which is what I had to do. I had to really focus on the fundamentals of Python. I come from a non-coding background as I graduated with a degree in biology. So honestly, I would handwrite my Python to make sure I understood, and I solidified that foundation where I didn't have to always look up information. So once I solidified that foundation of how to use a for loop or a while loop, if statement, these things, then I started building my skill set slowly, in a specific direction towards data analysis. In terms of AWS, I studied for a certification, and then in order to present knowledge and to help others learn and solidify my understanding, I made YouTube videos. So I stood in front of a whiteboard and I just would draw AWS diagrams and just showcase my knowledge to any of those individuals who were looking to learn it at a fundamental level, and to also showcase to recruiters that, even someone without a tech background can enter the tech space and be successful.
Best way to learn is to teach. 100%. Casey, you want to add anything?
I don't have a ton to add to that. I definitely agree with all those things. I feel like I very much resonate with the fact that I was introduced to a lot of things in classes I took, and it was really helpful to kind of like show me, this is what's out there. But in order to like really, I wouldn't say gain mastery, but in order to feel like you can really use these things, these tools to like create stuff, you just have to go do it, whether that's on your own or if you're lucky enough to find an internship or job that lets you, kind of like continue developing those skills. But one way or another, yeah, I agree. That's the best way to learn something.
Great. Okay, so I think since we still have quite a bit of time, but I am seeing some questions, so I'm going to pause the prepared question section just a moment and take one that was dropped into the Q&A. It doesn't specify any of you in particular, so it's open. Are there any roles for professional researchers / PhDs at big news companies? COVID highlighted the extent to which news media needs to understand scientific research and separate the wheat from the chaff. So again, are there any roles for professional researchers or PhDs at these big news companies? Any of you have an answer for that one?
So I do know there are roles, and we do have a research team, but in terms to the extent of the availability of those jobs, I'm unsure of, but we do have a place for PhDs and researchers.
Great. Casey or Christine, have you heard anything about involving kind of scientists specifically rather than more? I anticipate maybe there's some consulting roles, but I don't know about actual jobs, or maybe consulting. Are there consulting positions?
I admittedly don't know a ton about this, but I do know that like when I was working at the LA Times, there were semi-frequently folks on my team would like partner with consulting people that, you know, they like scientists they found to consult on a project, and they would be a co-author on that project, but it's not the same thing as like being like a resident at the paper. But I don't know if that's changed, and I also don't know the full extent of like what maybe they were doing that I wasn't involved in. So I don't feel like I can like totally speak to that. That's just what I saw.
I think the consultant question is an interesting one. Certainly, as methods get more complicated, I could see that developing more. You know, from what I've seen, it's been more kind of ad hoc, similar to what Casey had mentioned. Like if there's a big project and there's a particular level of skill or expertise that's needed, there will be consultations with experts in that particular topic area. I can't speak for all or any news organizations, so I'm not an official spokesperson. I was just thinking about like my colleagues, both past and present. So one past colleague that I worked with at the Financial Times has a PhD. There's a couple of people with PhDs on this team I'm working with now at the New York Times. They recently hired a survey researcher who previously worked at the Pew Research Center, who has a lot of experience in surveys to help run news surveys. And there are there's a weather data team that is hiring a meteorologist to work on that team. I've just listed a bunch of jobs, but I wouldn't want to give the impression that this is super common across the industry, or even super common at this one particular company. I think it's definitely something that larger organizations who can afford it are considering. But I don't know, I can't speak to the extent, like I can't predict like, 5 years from now, like there'll be a whole team of PhDs at news organizations. So.
Yeah. All right. I appreciate that. Thank you. So I think now I would like to talk a little bit about, just trying to make it more transparent and open up for our audience what the active data journalism is. So what a typical day on your job is. So you can get into as little or as much detail as you'd like there. I think we all email. My kids ask me what I do all day. Email is the answer. So, but if there's some specific tasks to your professions that you could highlight and what you do sort of on average, that would be great. Let's start with Sandeep.
Yes, so I work specifically with the CNN website and their mobile app. So ultimately what we're trying to do is increase user registration, engagement, retention, and a number of different metrics. And basically what we do day to day is based off of what we see from those metrics, we decide to go one direction or another, depending on whether they're increasing or decreasing, or basically we try to, make those day-to-day decisions based on those metrics that we receive every day.
Cool. Casey? I wonder if I should ask you that question of your previous job.
Yeah. So I mean, I had a couple of different jobs in journalism. It definitely varied team to team. It was kind of expected. It was because sometimes I was doing more daily kind of work, sometimes I was doing more long-term kind of work. I would say in the most recent role in journalism that I had at the LA Times, we would have we weren't daily. We'd have team check-ins like twice a week, lots of slacking, and usually a couple of like project specific team meetings throughout the week. I wish Sandeep were here because she was on that team and still is on that team, and she would have the answer. But it was that kind of stuff, and then kind of a split on like what I was working on depending on what the deadlines were. So like if I didn't have any like really pressing or soon deadlines for some of the more quicker turn stuff that I was doing, I might choose to focus on working on some features for the fire map that day. So it was, I mean, I was writing a lot of code, but I wasn't always on one thing. It kind of was flexible depending on what the calendar looked like.
Christine?
Yeah, my typical day is, as you might imagine, very driven by what is going on in the news. So currently pretty much what I'm focused on is related to the upcoming midterm elections in November, in one way, shape, or form. That's at this point in October, that is what all my days look like. So I'm trying to think of something specific I could help to describe. So yesterday, maybe a good example. This morning, the Times published a story that, not this morning, yesterday afternoon, this morning in the paper, they published a story presenting the results of the latest New York Times Siena poll, speaking of news surveys. And this story was about, focused on the US House of Representatives elections in 4 congressional districts across 4 different states. I can post it in the chat if that's easier. My role was to work with Ashley Wu, who is on the graphics team at the Times, to figure out which charts to make from the crosstabs that came out of the survey, and how exactly to present them on the page. And it was an interesting thing to work on, especially with a, let's say, 1.5 day turnaround period, because the story obviously is all about analyzing the results of the poll, and it was coming together in tandem simultaneously with the charts. And so there are a lot of Slack conversations, a lot of virtual meetings, a couple of in-person meetings for people who were both in the office, with myself, with Ashley, with the writers of the story, with the editors of the story, with the survey specialists I mentioned previously. It was definitely like a very collaborative effort to pull the story together in time for a publication yesterday at 7 p.m. in the newspaper, in the web page, and also in the newspaper in print. Actually, that is one interesting aspect that I didn't mention before, and I had no understanding of before I worked in journalism, was that at newspapers that were at one time papers and are currently still publishing a print edition, there is both online and in print, right? And those two are not necessarily the same thing, because something that works very well online maybe just doesn't work in the same way on the printed page, and especially with graphics. These graphics, thankfully, did they're pretty static bar chart map-esque things. But imagine if there was some like interactivity on the map or some animation of some sort. Then another consideration is to think about how that would translate to the printed page, which people do read, and you want to make sure that that both versions kind of capture the essence of what you're trying to convey. Just one other quick note before I forget on that as well, something I didn't internalize before I worked here, before I worked in journalism, was that when you think about how you read, I know I just talked about print, but how I read normally is on my phone or on a very small screen. So Sandeep, you were talking about working with the app and stuff. That kind of stuff resonates with me as well, because when we think about our work and the way that graphics are designed, they really do need to work very well for the mobile audience as well. So you wouldn't want to create this beautiful, amazing graphical presentation that only works on this huge computer screen, because probably the majority of the people who are reading it online, at least, are not going to see that huge computer screen. They're going to see it on their phones. So you want to make that experience just as good as the big piece of it. And so that, I don't know if that was a typical day. I guess that was a typical day nowadays until November 8th and until the election. Yeah.
Yeah, that I super appreciate that. You're highlighting something. Actually, Stella will ask a question in a minute about kind of the topics of the stories that you cover, and how you are a little bit beholden to the ebb and flow of the current news climate, I imagine. But before we get to Stella's question, I just wanted to remind the audience to please go ahead and drop questions in the chat and in the Q&A. And I think we're small enough, if you would like to ask a question verbally, we can promote you to panelists, so you can come up on the screen if that's what you prefer. So don't forget to drop questions in. And with that, Stella, you want to ask your question?
So back to this idea of the topics that you're asking, or that you're working on, I was sort of curious how common it is for you to work on a topic that you don't know very well, and what it's like to then represent that topic in data. It seems like it might be pretty difficult.
Anyone want to take that one? Christine?
It can be common, yes, in the news. Sorry, I don't know why I'm laughing, because well, news happens in various ways and across various topics. It's not like you have a choice, because how should I put this? Everybody has expertise in different topic areas, or have more interests in different topic areas. But when news occurs, even if you are not an expert in that area, it's important, I think, to understand it and cover it for the news audience. Maybe I'm trying to think of a good example of this. Well, I think Well, I think a lot of elections related things could be a good example. Yes, expertise is subject matter knowledge is important to do like very, very deep dives into certain types of election data. But I think also one thing that I always have valued is being able to explain and break down this very complicated data in a way that audiences can understand. One thing I have also always appreciated about journalism and really view as part of the goal of my job and others' job in this field is to do the work for the audience beforehand so that you can present like it in the most clear way. So like maybe the audience is not an expert on polling, for instance, or elections results or whatnot. But if you can present it to them because you have researched it and done that work, then you can, I think that's a very successful public service that a news organization can provide.
Yeah, absolutely. Sandeep or Casey, do you have any thoughts on trying to cover stories that might be pretty far outside your field?
I would say it's common. I would agree with Christine. I feel like it happened pretty frequently to me. I mean, even there are times too where you'll know sometimes so when I got hired for my LA Times job, it was hired to like rebuild some apps and build a new app, and they were all disasters focused. So I was rebuilding an earthquake app and I was building a fire app, and I didn't know anything about those kinds of things aside from like what I learned in school. Like it wasn't, but I'm definitely not an expert. I'm still not an expert. I am an expert in where to get data about fires. And I can visualize that, but it's actually really interesting because this is a whole separate topic, but like I personally am now very interested in fires and fire data and like how we can create systems in the state that we live in now that like would actually help alert people to when there are fires. And I know how hard, because I've worked with this data, that can be. And then there are some times where I do things and they'll have a visual component and somebody will come over to me and be like, hey, well, have you thought about like including wind data and other types of data to help kind of like project where the fire might go? And I'm like, yes, I have thought about it. You are correct. That would be a great kind of thing to try and model, but I am not a fire scientist and I don't have the skills to do that. And I'm not going to make something that's wrong. Like, so it's challenging because even though I felt like I got good at that to an extent, I think that could be applied to a lot of different topics that you cover in journalism. Is like you kind of feel like at home with them at some point, and you have a pretty good sense of what's there and how to display it and how to make sense of it. But I'm still, I mean, I didn't go to school for like fire data science. Like I don't know it. And not to say I couldn't eventually learn it, but like I've got a lot of other stuff I'm doing. So like it's challenging for sure.
I bet. I can't even imagine. Sandeep, you have any little thoughts to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say it's pretty challenging. I don't have a background in journalism. So for me to apply a lot of the tools that I've learned, I have to have a solid foundation of the domain knowledge of what I'm working with in order to make those inferences or draw conclusions and then be able to share it with other people so they're able to do their next steps. So I just try to ask questions, and to the people who have been there the longest, try to read as much as I can and study outside of work to kind of build that domain knowledge so I can be more of an asset to the team.
Yeah. So you guys have just highlighted some of the challenges in working in data journalism, the deadlines, the working outside your field. Have you, and this is hopefully, I don't know, hopefully this isn't too hard a question to come up with. Sometimes it's challenging to think, well, what were the rewards, right? Is there something, an instance, or I don't know, a sign of appreciation or something that you felt was where the work that you did was particularly impactful and you felt that there was some real give back from the community, and maybe it's not from the community, maybe it's personally rewarding from your time as a journalist, or in data journalism, I should say?
Well, I think I was going to add to, the previous question, but I think my answer could apply to this as well. One of my favorite parts about working in journalism is even if you aren't an expert in a area, when you're learning about it and researching it, you can connect with and consult with people who are experts. I really enjoy that that aspect. Like, if I am really interested in looking at a particular, data set about a particular topic, but I am not a person who studies that, I can call, maybe even the creator of that data set, depending, like if they are, if they're, working for another, an organization that, does that kind of research, I can call them, we can talk, and I can learn more about their work and what they do, and like really get the opportunity to talk with people who have studied things for decades and glean their expertise. And I don't think, if I don't think I would have the opportunity to do that if I didn't work in journalism. I suppose I could, call someone randomly and be like, hey, I thought this was really interesting. I mean, I think I could, right? But like, it would be not part of my job to do that. So I think that's a very rewarding aspect of working in data journalism. And especially also, I would say, like, sometimes people, don't want to talk to you for like a quote in a story, right? Like sometimes, if you call someone, you're like, I'm just making this up, like I'm on deadline and I'm writing a story, and like, would you like to respond to this? That's not what happens at all. I'm making a caricature of journalism. But like, people sometimes won't want to provide a quote because they don't want to see their name like quoted in the paper. When you're working in a field that is more about is a lot about the data and a lot about the graphics, there is some of that where you do want to get people on the record, but sometimes you can talk to people on background and say, look, I'm not at this moment in time looking to quote you in the story. I would just really like to understand the technical aspects of this data. Like, can you take an hour to talk with me and like help me through this so that I can, further my knowledge? And then that's great because you've established a relationship with this person. And then if you do want to get them on the record, it is a lot easier because you've shown a demonstrated interest in their work. And also, even if you don't, end up talking to them on the record for the story, you have gained some knowledge of the data set that you're working with. So I think that's a really fun part about working in journalism, and definitely something that I find very rewarding personally.
Yeah, I imagine someone who's really curious, you get to learn about all different topics. Casey or Sandeep, you want to add anything about what's rewarding about your job?
I can say one of the things that's most rewarding is, to be able to document something that you've done and to have it, clear step by step. And then if someone in your immediate team or in a different team is looking to understand, that project, or, you can just send them that document and you can, feel good that you took that extra time to write those steps down, not just for that person, but for the future of the team, for anyone else who wants to learn about those projects. So I always find it rewarding to not just accomplish a project, but be able to build a foundation for the future for other people, whether it's the current, employees or people who are to come who want to jump on that project or learn more about it.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Casey?
I'm going to bring this up probably just this one more time, but I loved adding the evacuation zones to the fire map because I felt like the fire map itself was fine. It showed where fires were. It showed where the fires were, but that data is usually pretty outdated, and isn't really that helpful to people who need to know what's happening. Whereas the evacuation zone data was as current as I could find it. So, I mean, it could be even minutes old in some cases, and getting to like put that data on the map and like actually feel like I was having an actionable impact was very fulfilling. And I do miss that, admittedly. Like I loved that part of the job. And I have spun up some personal side projects that I'm gonna hopefully loop some of that thought work into. I think that like being able, I loved the public service aspect of journalism, and really being able to like, fires is the main example, but like kind of do work that actually really mattered to people, and made a difference.
Yeah, I can imagine. Oh, that's so cool. Okay, well, I don't want to end on like a bad note. So see if you can spin your responses to this next question in a positive light. Made me realize I should ask that question last. But we are coming up a little bit on time here. And I don't see any questions from the audience. So I'm going to ask this one, which we talked about earlier. What are some of the lessons learned from your career trajectory that got you where you are now, and embedded in that is that kind of what would you have done differently? And Sandeep, why don't you start with this one?
Yeah, I feel like I had a lot of, book knowledge entering this job, and I didn't have a ton of experience. And unfortunately, there's no real way to prepare for experience other than to experience it yourself. So I feel like I could have taken feedback a lot better. Sometimes I would take it personally or take it to heart when a manager would say, this is not the best work that we're looking for, or, sometimes I would be hard on myself about, those things that managers would say to me. So I would change my mindset and to say, don't take things personally. Don't take it to heart. Everyone's just trying to do a great job and do great work and produce great results. I would also say that out of school, we're always used to having, the syllabus, the textbook, all of the course material. And so it's built in a way in which you can be successful without really reaching out to many members of the team or your classmates. And I think I needed to reach out more to teammates. I needed to be able to be comfortable asking questions and to drop my pride and to say, I need help, or I'm confused, and to not be embarrassed about asking, stupid questions, or, just getting trapped in that mindset. So those are two of the things I would say I learned the most, and I would do differently: ask more questions and not to take feedback personally.
I think that's a life lesson we all could take for sure. That's really super helpful. Casey or Christine, do you want to jump in on that one?
So the question is what we would have done, what we wished we would have known or would have done differently.
Yeah, and I guess sort of embedded in that is or what lessons have you kind of learned along the way? And that can be sort of about your professional journey, or it can also be something about the current work that you do. What do you wish you would have known?
I think one key thing is that in school, I learned how to do data analysis in a particular way, and I learned how to implement certain statistical methods. Nothing like at an expert level at all, but I felt like because I knew these things, I had to apply them in my job. So in journalism, if there was a data set, I'd be like, oh yeah, let's, run these sophisticated models on this data and do all this like regression or whatever. And sometimes the story does merit that. Oftentimes it does not. One thing I wish I would have known is that it is sometimes the simplest story is the best one to tell, I think, or put a different way, the sophistication of the method is not correlated to use a stats term, was not necessarily correlated with the powerfulness of the story. Like you can tell the most powerful story using like a single spreadsheet where the rows are like something super impactful, super compelling, and you're just adding up the number of rows and you're reporting that figure in the story. That is some of the most powerful data reporting I've seen is doing that. And often it's actually obtaining that data, that spreadsheet, that is the hardest thing. Maybe like you have to make a public records request to a government organization to get that list, or maybe they respond to the public records request, but the response is this PDF that is actually a screenshot of of an Excel spreadsheet. Like, okay, now are you going to transpose all those rows? Maybe you will, or maybe you'll use software to extract the data. But like, analyzing the data in this instance wouldn't be the hard part. The hard part would be like getting that data and like really interrogating what it actually means. So I think that's a good thing to take away. But it's also good to know it's also good to have, basically it's good to understand how to apply your skills and where to apply them and where not to apply them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Not get it so wrapped around the axle and the method, right? Yeah. Casey, do you have in the last minute anything to spin on that?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this is actually counter to something Sandeep said earlier, but it's coming at it from the other side of things. Is like, I've never known exactly what I wanted to do. And so like, it wasn't a path to like get to what I wanted. It was, I'm going to do things I like and see what happens. And I think that's actually roughly worked out. Like, it's been hard sometimes because I kind of always envisioned having a more like linear career trajectory than I necessarily have. Hasn't been like super wild, but it's been up and down and around a little bit, and it probably will continue to be that way. I just started this job, so I'm not looking to do anything wild anytime soon. But I think it's interesting. Like, I mean, I kind of started with doing apps and visualizations and kind of moved into like doing consulting with apps and visualizations. And I've spoken to some folks at my company now about some of like the fire related data projects that I personally find interesting. And we do work with a variety of sizes and types of organizations. And it sounds like there might actually be some interest at the company to do something with some of this kind of data, which would be awesome. So like, so I just say, if something interests you and vice versa, if it doesn't, you don't have to stay there forever. You can always come back to, like, I might eventually end up back in journalism, who knows, but look for something that is interesting to you. Don't just sit around and be bored.
Good advice. All right. On that note, I know we're over time, so I'm going to let our audience go. Thank you, panelists, for all of your insights. Thank you, audience, for joining us. We do intend to have these career panels about once a month, aspirationally. We definitely have some other topics queued up in the coming months. So keep an eye on the website, and I hope you all enjoy the nice weekend. Take care, everyone.